I can. I'm here. All right. Yeah, like we did yesterday, and and every other issue. And actually, we're having audio issues right now, but we're going to work through it. All right. All right. You know what? Can you still hear me? I found a good way to fix it. It's actually, never mind. It didn't work.
Okay, so we should be able to hear both of us on the stream now. I am going to do another quick audio test. Hopefully, I'm not echoing too, but yep, I can hear both of us. So let's go ahead and get this started. We're a couple minutes behind anyway, and yesterday was a complete bust. So, without further ado, we apologize for the issues yesterday and the audio issue today. We're trying to get everything straightened out. As I mentioned yesterday, it may not have even been heard because there was audio issues pretty much the whole time. That I purchased a used PC and I had to download all the streaming software, and we're streaming to multiple locations at once and using a bunch of software in case we ever do get really big, where people can call in live or join our Discord server live. And in doing so, it will give them the opportunity to let their own voice be heard on the channel, because it's not just about me, it's not just about Geo, it's about letting your voice be heard as well. So, with that in mind, if you would like to call in, the number is scrolling up on the screen in the upper right hand side. That number is going to be 202 888 5350. We're going to be taking calls the entire time. I do have that screen up now, so if anyone does call in, I'll be able to hear you and we'll be able to see you come in. With that in mind, it should also allow Geo to hear you as well. I know we had a caller before and he had to listen to the stream to kind of catch in with the caller. That shouldn't be the issue today. So, without further ado, uh, Geo, let's take on the topic of assisted suicide.
Let's do it.
So yesterday, while we were getting all this straight, I actually deleted the videos from all the channels. But you mentioned the word euthanasia instead of the word assisted suicide, and I specifically titled this as such, and I specifically use this phrasing because although euthanasia would indeed encompass assisted suicide, I would say that the two in and of themselves are fundamentally different things, which is why I use the phrase assisted suicide, not euthanasia.
Yeah,
Can you agree with that?
euthanasia is not even spelled assisted suicide.
I would agree. I would say that they are different things, and I would like to stick with the term assisted suicide throughout, if possible. Although, if we do swap it up a little bit, I just want to encourage viewers that it may not be, that it's not an end all be all if we slip up and say something along those lines, or if we, say euthanasia or assisted suicide, we may use the terms interchangeably. However, I would prefer to stick to the term assisted suicide if possible.
Yeah, it makes sense.
All right. So with that in mind,
You know what though? There's, I guess we can. I don't want to get into the weeds of it. There's a form of euthanasia that wouldn't be a suicide.
well, I agree. That's why I said I would like to stick to the term assisted suicide, because I think there are forms of euthanasia which would not encompass suicide. I would say they're just essentially murder. So I mean, in fact, if you look historically at euthanasia and how it was used in historical cases, especially in things like mental health clinics, which were formerly known as insane asylums, and in places like, obviously, like communist Germany, euthanasia was a catch-all term to basically end anyone's life early. So I wouldn't really say that's assisted suicide. I would say that's murder. Shooting someone in the head isn't assisting in their suicide, it's killing them.
Yeah, unless they want it.
Well, we'll get into that. That's kind of why it's up here. That's kind of why it's up here. So I put a couple points up on the board, and we can take them in any order you want and discuss them in any order you want. I think they're all kind of gonna lead into one another, with the exception of I have Dr. Death down there, Jack Kevorkian, which is just a little bit of the history of assisted suicide or physician-assisted suicide in the United States. And I've done a bit of research on him, and I've looked into him before, but I did some more for this topic. But we can kind of start anywhere you want, and I know you wanted to kind of doubly include passive and active and voluntary versus non-voluntary. I'm using the term non-voluntary versus involuntary, and again, that's very particular and specific, but we may also interchangeably use non-voluntary and involuntary just for those listeners. So, just a heads up.
Okay.
So let's start wherever you want to start.
Unfortunately, I don't know much about legal aspects of euthanasia in the United States. I remember reading a court case like several years ago, and I think it was up in Oregon. Well, I mean, is there a federal law for euthanasia?
Nope, it's going to be handled statewide, and currently I think there are about 13 or 14 states that allow for some form of physician-assisted suicide. But the United States is by no means a federal law regarding the prescription versus actions that take place thereafter. However, there are federal laws in place in other countries, like the Netherlands, which was the first country to put in federal law for things like physician-assisted suicide or assisted suicide.
Netherlands is very, very secular, very progressive.
Yep. I would agree. I would say they're on the very cutting edge of freedom, if we want to use that term. They're very pro people in the Netherlands. They basically want to allow you to do what you want. And that, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't, not to delve too deep into the Netherlands and why they're probably one of the most free countries in the world, but things like recreational marijuana use, things like prostitution, things like physician-assisted suicide are all legal in the Netherlands. There is no issue at all. So as far as being progressive and as far as legality is concerned, there are countries out there that definitely have looser laws, including Canada, which has looser laws on physician-assisted suicide than the United States. So just something to keep in mind, but given that both of us are in the United States, we'll probably be talking about some of the legalities in the United States. California actually very recently passed laws allowing for physician-assisted suicide, and that was largely due to a push by a young lady that was diagnosed with terminal cancer. But that was within the past, I want to say 5, but I think it's closer to 7 years now, so I'll just say 10. In the past 10 years, California has passed a law for the allowance of physician-assisted suicides in cases of terminally ill patients. Oregon is definitely up there. Michigan, which is where Dr. Jack Kevorkian, a.k.a. Dr. Death, started his practice and lived for many years, has passed multiple laws regarding physician-assisted suicide, some of those directly in response to Jack Kevorkian's actions. So, before we get further down a rabbit hole there, what are your thoughts on assisted suicide? Do you think it should be legal? Do you think there should be some sort of federal law and or guidelines? Do you think the states deciding is fine, or where do you stand?
So I come at this from both a secular humanist and libertarian worldview. it's good that it's mostly decided at the state level because it's less centralized. But I'd like for the government to completely stay out of it altogether. I don't I don't make much of a distinction between euthanasia or some of the more private aspects of a person's life, like their birth control or abortion or etc. Like I don't see why you couldn't apply some of the same logic from Griswold versus Connecticut to euthanasia, which is what eventually which opened the door for uh, substantive due process and I don't want to dive too much into constitutional law, but that eventually led to Roe v. Wade and etc.
But,
So
well, I mean, not you
I
don't have
think
to.
that
We
it
don't have
is
to delve into it. I don't think we have to delve into it too highly. However, I will say that obviously one of the biggest proponents and one of the greatest arguments, in my opinion, for things like assisted suicide and one of the biggest proponents for it and arguments or cases to be made for it are the 14th Amendment rights. So
yeah.
I think if you have ground to stand
That's
on,
essentially
that's
what
where you're going to be.
Connecticut versus Griswold. It, it looked at the 14th Amendment and um, developed something called the right to privacy. So that is your personal medical decision. I don't think the government should be involved in that whatsoever. That's between you and your physician. So far,
Gotcha.
that is voluntary. But
Fair
the,
enough.
the,
No,
the, on-
no.
the only time I would start involving the government is when there's a case where the person is comatose or maybe insane or there's something preventing them from making a rational decision or properly or getting a full understanding of the consequences of what they're doing. That's the only time I would involve the government. But if assuming they're in the right state of mind, I don't think the government should be involved in it whatsoever.
What about cases of, for instance, underage children? I mean, we don't even have to say the legal age for the United States or drinking. I mean, what about cases of toddlers up until about the age of 15 or so?
Yeah, so that would fall into one of the categories what I was talking about, like being in a position where you can fully understand the consequences of your actions. That's why when it's like a toddler commits serious crime, let's say he stabs his classmate or something like that, we don't hold him to the same standard that we would an adult because they didn't fully understand the repercussions of their actions. So,
And and
but
so
yes,
just to
in
clarify,
that case, when like involving children, I would definitely include the government just because the person of interest does not have the capacity to fully understand the consequences of their decision.
so
I
just
wouldn't
just to
just take that
clarify,
from a person who's insane, etc.
just to clarify for people watching and for myself, you think in cases in which non-voluntary assisted suicide is considered that the government should be involved? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that and only in those instances, it when the person is consenting to it, then I don't see how it's government or anybody else's business.
Well, here's where another reason I wanted to use the term assisted suicide versus euthanasia, and that's in active cases of voluntary assisted suicide. And so, let's say you have an elderly person that's suffering from some terminal disease and they're in severe pain. I would say that a lot of people would perhaps agree that it might be best, given that they're closer to the end of their natural life anyway, for that person to choose to partake in something like assisted suicide, right? Because they're in immense pain anyway. They have a terminal illness and they're already at the end of their life. What about cases of people that are suffering from mental disorders such as depression or bipolar? They're not in
This will this
they're not in
this will
necessarily
be getting
physical
to
pain.
a gray area.
Well, that's
just
why
because of
it's kind of a debatable
yeah.
topic.
Yeah. So because of the thing about this, just because a person has been diagnosed with depression doesn't mean they're not in the right state of mind to make decisions. Like a depressed person could make just as can make a decision and be just as rational as I. And so could a bipolar person could as well.
Yeah, but not in
So
all cases, I don't think, and that's where it's going to
not in
be
all cases.
a really that's where this is a debatable topic because you have people that are capable of making completely rational and justified decisions, but you also have those same people suffering from illnesses such as depression, which quite literally chemically alter the balance of their brain and tell them or basically they may sometimes feel, and I'm not going to speak for everyone that has depression or everyone that suffers from bipolar disorder, but I can tell you from personal experience and friends and family members that have suffered from these things that depression often makes you feel the situation is necessarily worse than actuality. And with that in mind, you're not actually making a true rational decision.
Mm. So
So like I mean like I'm
when
not
you
gonna
say rational, I guess this is kind of it gets a little subjective because just because there is a chemical imbalance. I'm sure even like the most healthy person has some slight chemical balance in some form or fashion that's going to alter his decisions making process. So it doesn't need to it needs to be perfect. Like it doesn't have to like he doesn't. I'm not saying he needs to form some sort of syllogism and fall. Hey, this is the process that I went through, and this is perfectly logical. Something like that. You know, I guess roughly what most people would consider the right state of mind to do something or to take any action. Like for instance, like if a person went and let's say murdered someone,
mm-hmm.
saying that he was depressed, that is not going to fly in court. That is not going to get him off the hook.
Yeah, I mean
Whereas
even in
saying that
cases
he was clinically insane, that would.
well
So
I was gonna say
that's the standard that I'm playing.
even in cases where criminals are found clinically insane, it typically not always but typically in criminal cases where or where a person is found insane or they're found unjust for sentencing, they're still found guilty, but they're found guilty by reason
Yeah.
of insanity, and then they're sentenced to something like a non-typical
Well,
sentence.
well, not necessarily. If you provided an affirmative defense, like and like they've determined that you did not have the mens rea to be be convicted of this crime, then the it doesn't mean you're free to go because you've been declared mentally insane. But yeah, you will be uh, sent to some facility or another for treatment.
Yeah, that's essentially what I was saying. I was
But
saying you're still going to
yes,
be found. You're still going to be found guilty, even though you don't have the mens rea. But you're found guilty by reason of insanity, and sentencing and the after effects are different. Versus in
yeah.
a
So
typical case of murder, let's just say murder in the first degree, assuming that there's no mental case being involved, and I mean that in the sense of a mental court case decision. I mean to clarify, then typically it's prison. That's the end of it. But in cases where there's a mental imbalance and that can be proven with a history or whatever means are involved, then sentencing might be you get sent to an institution and you have to have
yeah, and
certain treatment and maybe
I'm not
for all of your
I'm
the
not
rest of
saying that
that
I have
person's
like a
life.
perfect. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
In okay. But anyway, so I'm not saying that there's a perfect line at, that you can draw here and show when this person can make the decision for assisted suicide or when not to. But I think the standard that we use in criminal justice system, I think that's a good framework to at least start from.
So I'm I'm glad we're kind of getting all of this out of the way because I'm gonna try to snowball us at least at some point in time. I'm gonna let you know it in advance. Because it's going to be important. I just want to kind of get where you stand on it because although we've known each other for a very long time, I don't know exactly where you stand, and that's where I'm trying to point out some potential gray areas and asking about very specific situations because, as you know, and as you're aware, that if I can set your position up for any point of failure, no matter how ridiculous, uh, it it's something to make us reconsider. It's something to make you and myself reconsider. So, with that in mind, do you think all cases of active voluntary assisted suicide should be allowed?
No. So that's like that's when we're talking about like children, right?
Well, okay.
So
So, in all cases
I wouldn't say that a child could consent to it. So
and
or do it voluntarily. So, but in a legal sense. But we all know like children can consent to things,
what about
right?
teenagers? And I mean late teenagers that wouldn't be legal according to the justice system. So, 15 to 17 years old.
Yeah, I mean, so the reason why it's hard to draw a line is because there are some teenagers who could be perfect, who can make this decision like perfectly rational, and there are people in their 30s who could not.
Yeah, I mean there are
So,
people in their 40s and
um,
50s that could not as well.
yeah, exactly. And so since there is no perfect age for humans, we're all different. There's no um there's no line where or an age where humans instantly become a rational decision maker.
So,
We're
so
still
how
gonna
how
we're
do
gonna
we?
have to pick somewhere that's essentially going to be arbitrary. But it's just we just use our best judgment. I
Okay,
would
you don't think it should be a case
I
by
mean
case
I just
basis? You think there should be an arbitrary line in the sand?
roughly, and there should be exceptions to it. Like I like to make it around 15, 16 ish, but I think there should be exceptions for people younger than that. I, but I don't want to. I'm very uncomfortable with saying let's allow 10-year-olds to kill themselves.
Fair enough. So let's talk about let's springboard off of that into the idea of uh, passive versus active. Do you think
Okay.
all passive suicide should be allowed? Again, with the exceptions that we just talked about, we'll say with everything that we just established, passive suicide, assisted suicide in general should be allowed.
Yeah, I mean, so like, I'll treat passive and active voluntary really the same way because it's really the same outcome because the person is consenting.
Yeah,
And
but
so
here's going to be a big
whether
differentiator, and this is
whether you're
where.
inject say it again.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
I was saying like so whether you're injecting something into the person to kill them or discontinuing some life saving treatment. I don't think that's much of a difference.
Yep. So this is where I
For
think you and
me,
I are
I
going to have
actually
some
recognize the
disagreements.
difference.
So this is where you and I are going to have some disagreements. Let's say I think at least because I'm gonna just set up a scenario, and I will warn people now that it may be uncomfortable to listen to. So just be aware. Obviously, the discussion is assisted suicide, and we're going to be talking about that in general. But let's say hypothetically we have a teenager in their late teens, maybe even in their 20s. It doesn't matter. But they're in their early 20s. They wouldn't be capable of doing things like buying a firearm until they're at least 18.
Yeah.
Do you think that buying that person a firearm and providing it to them is the same as them stealing a firearm to commit suicide?
No. Well, because I mean,
Well, with the exception of the
selling
theft
it, you're
portion.
violating someone else's property rights.
Okay, breaking it. Let's say using one that belongs to a family member and or friend.
Well, so in that case, you're still using something that belongs to someone else. But as far as the
Okay, let's
first
say
death
hypothetically
is the same outcome.
you're hunting buddies. You grew up in the South and you're hunting buddies, and they ask to borrow a rifle, and they let you do so accordingly. And then you use that to then commit suicide. This young person.
Okay.
Is it the same as them as you buying a weapon for them and providing it to them with the explicit purpose of committing suicide?
No, because I mean, because in one case I knew beforehand, in the other, I had no idea.
Okay, so in the cases of stopping medication versus like you think in at least in active voluntary cases, but in non-voluntary cases where they can't necessarily express that or they're too young, what if they just don't express that? That's different.
So now we're talking. So now we're comparing voluntary and non-voluntary. So like that's the part that matters to me. It's like because I'm all about consent.
Right, but
That's the only thing that I care about. Like
but
relative to this.
let's say hypothetically you know this person has been this way for a long time. They're voluntary. They're the one pulling the trigger, and I mean that in the very literal sense. So it doesn't matter that they used a borrowed weapon and a different method than they explained to you. It matters that they used it on themselves, or if I had told you to buy me one, would you do it? Or I asked you to and I provided you the money, would you then do it? Because if not, I feel like there's a problem there. And I could be wrong, but I feel like there's a problem.
You mean like if you ask me to buy you a gun so you can shoot yourself?
Yes.
Would I do it?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't do that.
No. Why not? Because I am an active, voluntary person with intention of committing suicide, and you would just be the person assisting me in doing so.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, you have a right to do it, but I wouldn't do it. But I wouldn't help you. Just if you decided
But you think
decided you wanted to kill yourself, that is your right. But
do
I
you
wouldn't help you do it.
but do you think doctors should be forced? Do you think doctors should be forced to help me to do it?
No, it should all be consensual. No one should be forced to euthanize, nor should someone be forced to help euthanize anyone.
Okay, but in cases of physician-assisted suicide, in cases of physician-assisted suicide, you have cases in which doctors are, by law, required to either stop administering medication via a proxy, someone who's in charge of their estate in cases of non-voluntary users, and or literally do it according to that person's wishes in assuming a state of active mind presence and them just saying I no longer want to live. Therefore, stop giving me medication.
I'm opposed to that. That's why I think the government should completely stay out of it. As long as the only time the government should come in, it's when it becomes non-consensual. When there's a party involved that does not fully understand the repercussions or wasn't involved in the decision-making process. So in your case, you have the government stepping in, forcing a doctor to help someone kill themselves. I'm opposed to that. That violates the biggest concern I have, which is consent. It needs to be consensual.
Yeah, so I mean, like, what do you do for people who are desiring death, that want to no longer continue living, yet they're on something like life support at a hospital? You just hope somebody there has the audacity and or willingness to turn your medication off.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think that would be too hard to find. I mean, so I know people who, well, I know people who have had to make the decision to unplug the machine, which is passive euthanasia. So I mean, I don't think that'd be too difficult to find someone willing to.
I mean, I think that almost comes down to a case by case basis. I think in cases where you think that person's in a state of suffering and or a case of non-hope, such as brain damaged and comatose, it might be easier than if that person seems to be otherwise healthy. So you just have a, you know, 55-year-old going in for a routine procedure at a hospital, and for instance something goes wrong and now they're in the hospital for a few days and they're just like, I don't want to do this anymore, let's just end it all. And they seem in a fine mental state and they seem otherwise healthy, but now you have people that are almost going to be forced in this position. Like, how do you keep that from happening? Or what do you say? Like, do you think the government should be?
Like, someone who doesn't know that they're sick goes to the doctor and they fall ill at the hospital. They wind up on a machine, and then the hospital has to make a decision whether or not to keep.
Well, no, that would just involve them finding like nearest next of kin. Like the hospital's duty, unless prescribed in a living will, is to save that person's life. So they're going to do that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a healthy person just having some sort of major illness that's not causing them suffering, as far as physicality is concerned, but they still want to end their life anyway. So let's just say, hypothetically, someone has an interesting or rare blood disorder. You and I both know, personally, I won't call this person's name out, a person with an interesting blood disorder. As far as both of us know, it doesn't really cause them a lot of physical illness, pain, suffering, anything along those lines. In fact, they didn't know they had it for the first 12 years of their life. But if that person, and of being of sound body and mind, decided to go into a hospital and say, I don't want to keep living, please kill me, you think that everyone or anyone is going to just volunteer to do this, given that person's like 35 years old and, as far as we can tell, physically as healthy as you and I?
And I wouldn't feel uncomfortable with them. But I'll tell you this: just because the person can't find someone that's willing to assist him in suicide, that doesn't mean that his rights are being violated. So,
but you think, like,
he
so
may be out of luck. Like he have to find a consenting party, but he can't force someone to assist him in a suicide.
So, I mean, I sure, I guess the point is, my point is being that, like, what about those people? Like, is it fine for them to seek out help? And then on the other side of that, let's say they do have someone voluntary and willing to assist them in suicide. You don't find an issue in that?
No.
So I'm just going to take it to the extreme now.
That's perfectly fine. So here's the thing. Like, I don't... like, if a friend of mine decided to... Like, let's say you decided to kill yourself. You decided that you wanted to kill yourself. I would do everything I could to try to talk you out of it. Even at the end of the day, it is still your decision. You have a right to do that.
Okay, I'm just going to take this.
I would not help you, and I would actively take steps to convince you otherwise.
Okay, I'm going to take my little scenario of my person with a rare blood disorder that doesn't seem to be in any physical pain, and they've never, claimed to have any or anything like that. I'm going to take them, I'm going to make them an example. Would it be okay, in your worldview, or your view specifically on assisted suicide and or euthanasia, for that person to find a volunteer who is willing to help them in their suicide, and those two people randomly at their own leisure have the person that's assisting shoot the volunteer in the head?
So did everybody consent?
Everybody's consenting. Like, the person that is the 30-year-old with the rare blood disorder that has no physical ailments but seems to be of sound body and mind, and the person that is shooting them in the head, knowing the situation, not doing it out of malice and or forethought, but doing it because they genuinely feel like it would help the other person at least accomplish their goal of killing themselves. Both of them being consenting adults, would there be anything wrong with that?
So now I'm gonna sound insane.
Yes, you are, and that's why I was curious.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, you and I have different viewpoints, at least on that, because I would say at best that's manslaughter. At worst, it's probably murder.
Well, yeah. I mean that is under the current legal system. Sure, that is the case.
Yeah,
But
I would say
so
that's
from an
and
ethical point of
that
view,
and that and that's
I wouldn't call that a murder.
ethically, I would still say it's murder. Because here's my argument against that. If it's such a serious mental concern, then why not just take the steps to do it on your own? There should be no reason to have another person involved in that. And although I am pro, like, you being in control of your life, death with dignity, the works, I think that you should have absolute control of your own person, and that includes your body, and that includes your death. I think that getting other people involved is wrong on a very fundamental level. Unless, even if they're consenting. Because, well, essentially, you don't know the psychological damage that could cause to another person. And by doing so, you're essentially.
But those are risks that he's willing to accept if he's doing it.
That's great, but until you murder someone in cold blood and then say it was because they wanted it, it's really not going to impact you the same way.
Yeah, so that's the thing with freedom. If you're in charge of yourself and you're in this, you alone have to make these decisions about what's best and what's not best. You're going to have to accept the consequences.
Yes, but I don't think
that doesn't make it wrong.
I don't think unless you've murdered someone before that you can be fully aware of those consequences. And by asking someone to step in and take on those consequences without you being fully aware of them, in and of a sense, is wrong. It's almost duping that person, again, unless that person has previously killed someone, into doing something that A, they have never done before, and B, can't fully understand the consequences thereafter. So,
because neither party understands the consequences, right?
No, I mean, one clearly understands the consequences. They're no longer going to be alive. That's it. That's the end of the journey.
Well, so does the other person.
No,
understand that
well,
no longer going to be alive.
Yeah, but what kind of toll might that take upon that person because they have to live with it? The other person gets to die.
Yeah, I mean, but it's still consensual. So even if the toll is like just depression for the whole life, or he turns mentally insane, I mean, winds up killing themselves over the guilt of having killed someone else. Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately something that he'll have to accept. I mean, even if he didn't fully understand, even if he didn't fully, think about what exactly it is that he was doing and think about all the repercussions, that is still, I mean, his right to do so. If you have a right to do something, then you also have the right for someone to help you. Like I have a right to build a house. I also have the right to have help building the house. Right? So I said call you like, hey, help me build this house.
Yeah, but you have the right to get it. Yeah, but you have the right to get addicted to heroin. You don't have the right to have someone help you get addicted to heroin.
Well, you have the right to ask, and if they decide to help you, then sure.
Yeah, but that's not. No, it's not even a right. Like that's. I mean, you don't have the right to have someone help you. You have the right to ask for help.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Exactly. That's what I was saying. So, and if they decide that, and if you can ask, and if they decide to help, it's all consensual. Then that's your right. No one's rights are being violated.
But yours are. Like in a sense, yours are being violated. Like let's say, in the cases, and we'll get back to assisted suicide because versus heroin. But in the cases of assisted suicide, like that's it. That's all there is to it. And by no voluntary measure could anyone ever foresee the outcome or down the road of the consequences of these actions to their fullest extent. And by basically
I mean,
even
maybe they could, maybe they couldn't.
but
But
by
maybe
asking
you're
some
not even the first person that they've killed. Maybe they've assisted a lot of people.
but by
That's
asking
the story.
someone, you've essentially, at least in my view of this whole thing, you've tainted that person.
By asking
Mm-hmm.
requests.
Yes. It kind of like in
So I mean,
my
in
two
that
cents,
sense, so
it'd be kind of like me
any sort of request.
asking something completely ludicrous of you, like for like out of nothing. Although we've been friends for like years and years and years, it would to me it be akin to me asking you for something absolutely ludicrous.
You still have a right to ask.
But it wouldn't that
I may or may
strain
not.
you as a person, and wouldn't that like violate our friendship? I mean, to me, asking someone to go to the extent of suicide, well, in this case, assisted suicide by helping them, you're violating the very core of not harming another person to the extent of they're no longer going to be there. You're not only harming them, you're taking them out of this world. And there's not much I can consider that would be worse than that. So you're
Yeah. So
asking someone to do
I,
quite literally to someone the worst thing that can be done to them.
I don't think we're going to agree here because, like, for me, it's all about consent. If the person's consenting, if all parties are consenting, there are no rights being violated. I mean, we could talk about how prudent the decision is, but there is nothing inherently immoral with it, not from my point of view.
Interesting. I mean that's fair enough. I can't legally argue the other standpoint. I can just I mean it's almost an appeal to emotion, but at the same time it's an appeal to like that person's humanity at the same time. And that's not a great argument, but surely you must see where I'm coming from in asking someone to do the most heinous of all things and ending another person's life.
I mean, yeah. I mean, so like, I can totally relate. So here's a real life situation that the audience doesn't know, but I mean, like you know, like it's like my mom died about a year and a half ago, right?
Yep.
And so I remember early on, she was being very strong. She wanted to fight through this. She was talking about how she hasn't seen all her grandbabies yet, and she wants to be here and she's enjoy life and everything, right? And as the weeks progressed, I could see her will diminishing,
Yep. Yep.
and it got to the point that I remember one of the last conversations I had with her as I think it was the last conversation. I was pulling into a food line, which isn't relevant to this story. But anyway, so I remember where I was going. And I was talking to her on the phone, and she told me that she's just tired of this. That's what her words were. I'm
Mm-hmm.
tired of this. And then something happened, and then I remember my dad took over the phone, and I thought that's probably the last time I'm going to hear from my mom. But I when a person is driven to a point where they want to just go ahead and end it because of their suffering, think about it. They have lost all control of their life, of their body. It is just doing the body's just doing what it wants. Life is just happening to them by allowing allowing us euthanasia or assisted suicide. It gives that person one last modicum of control over themselves. Just one little aspect of sovereignty over their life that they've for the most part just completely lost control of.
And
So
and
and I remember
again and
thinking,
again
I was
and
like, if she did, like, unfortunately, she had succumbed to the disease. But I remember thinking that it may come to the point where we'll have to make a decision that's because she might ask to go ahead and just continue the treatment, and we might have to make a decision on whether or not to even allow that.
Right.
I mean,
Essentially, act as
it was.
proxy.
Go ahead.
Yeah, essentially to act as a proxy on her behalf, given the
Yeah,
mental and physical state of deterioration in late stages of a debilitating disease.
yeah, and so I mean, and think about this, like if even if she never asked me. I mean, of course, I never up to me would have been up to my dad. But if my dad wasn't around, like, there's no way she would have asked me and my brother to do that. 'Cause I just know my mom. She just wouldn't ask that and have us live with the idea that we killed our mom. So she wouldn't have let that go down. But if she did, it would. I don't think it'd be violating our rights. It would be. I would say it would be unparental to put such a burden on a child, and it comes really close to violating someone's rights, but it's not. I don't think it is.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously didn't intend for the topic to get very personal, which is why I didn't bring up myself and my things. And obviously, I knew the situation with your mom, and I didn't necessarily want to, bring that up because it's not a comfortable topic for you or myself, given that we've known each other for 25 years.
Yeah, it is.
However, however, I will say that in the situation, and I'll use your exact situation, that if your dad was not capable or not around to make such a decision, by placing such a burden on you or your brother, it is essentially, in a very real sense, it has taken away part of your personhood because you've been asked to do something so fundamentally opposed to how your brain should work. You should have. There has never been a time in which I did not think you loved or cared about your mother, and there would never have been a time in which I thought you would want to harm her in any way or succumb to harm, and that would obviously include the situation of death. And so, by putting you in such a situation, in such a precarious situation, even though it may not have been her will, desire, or fault, had the situation been different, it may have unfortunately defaulted to you or your brother's decision. But in an active case in which your mother would have to decide, I know for sure she never would have made you. She never would have made that decision. However, if that case were there, everything in your brain would have stopped you from making such a decision, even if it may have been the right one. And that's why I think it's a violation of your rights, because at that time you're forced into a position to decide something that has never once crossed your mind, and that you never wanted to consider, and that you don't ever want to consider. And by doing so, you've put somebody in an uncomfortable and frankly horrible situation in which a decision has to be made on someone else's behalf. And not only are you taking like a situation and that's already horrible, but now you're putting pressure and you're forcing someone to make this decision when it's not a decision they would normally or otherwise have to make. You're forcing someone to decide the outcome of your life.
But think about it from the. Imagine you're the person suffering, right? You have lost all control of your life. Of your body is doing something that you can't control. Your finances are wrecked because hospital bills. Like you have no longer have any control of your life. You're pretty much in the vehicle with no steering wheel, and life is just happening to you.
I don't have to imagine too hard.
You're not in a position physically to be able to end your own life. You need help to do it. You doesn't think that gives letting them at least control that one decision, that last decision, just restore some modicum of humanity, of control
So
of what it's like to be a human
so
over their life.
there's two things that I would say in that situation. One, depending on how physically incapable I am, I would either acquire some sort of medication, drugs, cleaning product, etc. And then two, I would want to be as least involved with anyone else as I could, because I don't want to A, be a burden, or B, make them have to make such a decision, because it is an incredibly selfish decision to end your own life. I am very aware of that. I am very aware of the outcome and the reasonings behind it. I am very easily empathetic with people who are in such a situation in which they feel that their whole life is out of control and things are just happening to them. However, putting the burden upon someone else or asking someone else to share that burden with you is A, incredibly selfish, and B, it's putting them in a situation that they normally would never have to face and that they never would want to face. Because if I were in a situation where I felt like everything was out of my control and I had no hope for the future, the last thing I would want would be to ask someone like you or my sister or my parents to put me out of my misery like I'm a dog. Because now I'm just putting burden and blame and shifting what is my fundamental issues and shifting them to you.
You can't do it on your own. Like, let's say you're immobile. You're so sick that you're immobile.
Okay, am I on medication? I mean, if I'm bedridden, am I taking any sort of medication?
In a scenario?
Yeah, am I taking any sort of medication to keep me alive or to help keep me alive longer?
Let's say you're not on any medication because they have no idea what's wrong with you.
Okay, am I capable of human speech?
Give you medicine to keep the pain down. That's all they can do.
Am I capable of human speech?
Say that one more time.
Am I capable of human speech?
No.
Can I write anything down?
No.
Can I blink?
You can squeeze a hand or something like that.
Okay, cool.
To, say yes or no.
Great. I can squeeze a hand. Then I would ask that someone put an IV full of chemical compound in my hand and then leave the room.
But I don't see how you could relay that.
I could squeeze
your hand in Morse code or something?
I could squeeze my hand on a chalkboard. I could squeeze my hand and indicate what letters I want to say.
But I mean, how would you even inject it? Like you can't move.
You said I could squeeze my hand. Squeezing an IV doesn't take much effort. And I'm already hooked up to an IV. I'm bedridden. Worst case scenario, put an IV full of saline in my body. And as the saline takes over, let me inject this into the saline. Or air, because injecting air into you would cause an embolism.
Like a personal preference. But I can't say that's a standard that everyone should be forced to.
I'm not saying it's a standard that everyone should be forced to. I'm just saying that putting someone else in the situation seems violating. It is violating of some sort.
But isn't that exactly what you're saying? Because so if I'm saying that it's violating somebody's rights, then I'm saying everyone should be forced to do such and such. Like no one should violate anyone else's rights. Like that's what I'm saying. Like I'm drawing the line there. But isn't that what you're saying? Like that should be the standard.
I'm saying that anyone in such a position, if capable, should avoid bringing other people into the situation. That's what I'm saying. At the very basics, that if at all possible, if you are conscious and capable in any way, that this should be something done in solitude. And I know what you said, and I agree with you that having that last modicum of strength, the last stand against your person, but I feel like asking someone else to help you kind of takes part of that away. And I mean help you in the sense of they have to go get you a gun, or they have to be a very active participant in how you die, versus I can just unplug this machine in a few minutes, all these beepings are going to stop because my heart's not going to keep pumping. Let me just unplug the machine myself.
Do you know why, like, in some of the more liberal countries where they have like very, very loose restrictions on assisted suicide, you know why they resort to that? One reason that they resort to it is that sometimes when you kill yourself, you're not always successful.
No,
The human
attempted.
body is pretty resilient.
Attempted.
Like
When you
shoot
kill yourself,
in the head.
yeah, when you kill yourself,
And
you're
then-
dead. When you attempt suicide, you might live.
Yes. Right. Exactly. And now you just created a mess for yourself, and now your life is even worse than it was before.
I'm very, very aware, and trust me, my brain has thought of all the fun possibilities in which are necessary to combat such an issue. Don't get me wrong, and not everyone has, and that's why I think people are hesitant to continue with the process, or hesitant to go through with the process, or there are a number of other reasons. But with that in mind, there are ways to ensure that doesn't happen. And there are ways that if you are in such a precarious situation in which you are immobile or what,
that you're successful in the suicide.
yes,
Well, I mean, no, but there's just no foolproof ways. I
Yeah,
mean,
yes, there are.
Like, stuff happens.
no, I can assure you there are foolproof ways.
Like, what would be a foolproof way?
So by drowning yourself in the ocean when no one is around, and by that
So
I mean
unconscious, and then you get found.
no, by
Somebody brings you out. And
ocean and
but you have brain damage. Now.
I'm
You went 2 minutes without.
ocean by yourself in the middle of nowhere with weights. No one is getting you up. It's not happening.
Maybe you just didn't see anyone around. Like this.
It's the ocean. There's nothing stopping your viewpoint.
As far as you can see.
If you can't see
that's the
anyone,
reasoning.
stop. If no one can see you, then no one's getting to you in time to save you.
You don't know if no one can see you.
Even if you can look around and not see anyone, then no one can get to you in time. I assure you. I assure you.
I mean,
A helicopter would have no chance. It wouldn't have a snowball chance in hell in getting to you in time. You would need a boat within a reasonable distance to see the situation and move forward. And then that person would have to be. That person would have to be in.
Where it's unlikely that you're going to survive an attempted suicide. So I could think of tons of those. But to say that it is definitely going to be the case, there is no way you're going to survive this. No, you can't with absolute certainty say that's not going to happen.
If you're gonna hold that line, then by having a volunteer do so, they should undoubtedly be ready to be prepared for attempted murder.
No.
Yes, because that person may fail at helping the other person commit suicide.
Yes, they could, but it's much more unlikely because they're an expert in that.
No, they're not. You just said I could hire a guy to shoot me in the head. This is the problem. This is one of the problems with your scenario.
The doctor isn't going to shoot you in the head.
I'm well aware, but you just said it had to be stop. You said it had to be voluntary and that I could do it on my own and I could hire someone as long as both participants were willing to assist me in my own suicide. No doctors have to be involved in that. I could get Joe Blow from down the street. Therefore, my chances have automatically decreased.
I had to ask you earlier. I was like, do you realize why people go to why they go to physicians for assisted suicide instead of just doing it on their own? And I was telling you, like, because a lot of times when you try it on your own, it can get messy.
And it can get messy when you have non-professionals help you too. It can get messy when you have professionals helping you.
But it can, but it's much more unlikely.
But like you say, much more unlikely. If I'm in a situation where I'm on a boat in the middle of the ocean and I have 2 concrete blocks tied to each of my feet, and I can't see anyone for miles around, and I've used radar and I've searched out the area, and I jump into the ocean with these blocks on my feet, and it is over 100 feet deep, and I have double-checked my knots and ropes and everything else. There is no chance that having a doctor inject a cocktail of drugs is more likely of killing me than that scenario. It is the exact same. Because if someone were to...
I don't know if it's the exact same, but in that scenario, it is very unlikely you're going to survive.
Yes, in both cases. In both cases, it is...
6 feet from you. If there's cinder blocks tied to you,
that was my point.
Well,
It is
but
it is it is
it's still not
equally
absolutely
unlikely.
certain, right?
No, and it is not absolutely certain that a doctor who injects you with a cocktail full of drugs is going to kill you.
Yeah, I know, but I know it's not absolutely certain. But what I'm saying is because of their expertise, it's more likely.
You don't need
Just like
expertise to
if
do something like drowning yourself or shooting your like head with a shotgun.
no, I
So
mean
you've
you don't.
increased your chances. I mean, like you can look at the statistics; they're available online. I know because I've researched them that there is literally a pain backslash success scale when attempted suicide rates, at least for the United States, over the past 20 years. And things like shotgun to the head, really up there as far as success rate, 99.999%.
Yeah,
And then
I mean sure, yeah,
as far as
yeah. Most
pain
people
ratio, it's
probably
pretty
with a
low.
shotgun.
Yeah, as
Yeah,
far as pain ratio, it's pretty low on the scale. So when people consider things like suicide, they look at these things. They look at factors like what's the most successful and what's the least pain. Because things like drowning, very painful. Also very successful, but also very painful. Things like
yeah. I
burning in
mean,
a fire, also
okay,
very
I'm not.
painful
I'm
and
not.
successful. So
Okay, hold on. I'm a little confused about what you're arguing. Because
I,
the only point I was making was that people tend to go to professionals because it's gonna be less painful and they know they're not gonna it's not gonna be like a botched attempt of a suicide and end up surviving.
just saying,
That's all I
if you
was
have
saying.
such dedication
Like,
and ability to ensure that you're not going to have such a botched attempt, there are ways to essentially give you the same statistical percentages of
there are
success.
ways to mitigate it, sure.
Yeah, just like having a doctor perform it doesn't guarantee it. There are ways to perform
Yeah,
or
I
attempt
acknowledge that.
suicide in which your success rate is substantially high to the point where it is equal to or better than a physician administering medication.
Well, I mean, I haven't looked at any of the studies of that, but yeah, sure. I mean, it, tying yourself to cinder blocks and then jumping in the ocean. I mean, that's about as solid as you can get. Because
I know.
yes,
I thank you. I've spent
even if I'm
years
in the
thinking
boat
about
with
it.
you, I'm not gonna be able to get you out if you jump off. You're gonna sink faster than I can swim to come get you. And then once I get down there, I'm gonna have the issue of bringing you back up and everything. So like, yeah, I mean, in that scenario, in all likelihood, you could die. But I'm saying it's not absolutely certain.
Yeah, just like it's not absolutely certain if a doctor adheres to a cocktail of drugs that you're going to die. But
Yeah,
you can
what I'm saying,
statistically
but
dramatically
people
increase your
when people
chances by
go to
taking
these
certain
guys, I mean,
things.
they're appealing to their expertise. If I mean, I don't know in many cases if people are asking a friend to do it,
Well, I'm,
right? I mean, they're going to physicians because they're strangers. I mean,
yeah, but like there's a fundamental difference here. We talked about how a doctor shouldn't be forced to help anyone with assisted suicide, and then B, having someone willing to help you.
mhm.
So obviously, you said earlier that if I were in a situation where I was considering suicide, that you would do everything in your power to stop me. However, A, that's
Well,
incredibly
no,
selfish of you.
no. So okay, hold on. I think you're a little sloppy with the language. Like
Okay,
I
you
would
say
do
it as you would
everything
like.
I could to no. I would do everything I could to dissuade you. Not everything I could to stop you. So like obviously like one way I could stop you is run into your house with like a gang of other dudes and we tackle you and tie you up, right?
Okay, and you wouldn't be willing to go that
That's
far to stop me from committing suicide.
say that again.
I said, and you wouldn't be willing to go that far to stop me from committing suicide.
Well, I mean, I might.
Yeah, you see, that's the like so that's literally stopping me.
Okay.
Just
All right.
saying.
So let me say the libertarian position is that you dissuade the person.
Okay,
You're not
okay.
using. You're not resorting to like physical force to stop them from doing that because then you're violating their rights. Like it's about persuasion. Like I'm gonna say, hey, you got a lot to live for, and blah blah blah, etc.
Mm-hmm. So the long and the short of everything here is that I think, when at all possible, getting another person involved is an absolutely atrocious act that violates that person, at least to some extent. Maybe not necessarily their rights, perhaps their emotional psyche, or their mental status as a human being. But it violates something of that person. Now, is it their rights? Maybe not necessarily, but there is no way you're ever going to convince me, as long as I can tell, and as far as I can tell, and as much as I've thought about the subject, and as many real-life situations as I've been in, such as knowing people that were on life support that had their plug pulled. It happened to my roommate less than a month ago, where his uncle was on life support, and the decision had to be made whether they were going to continue treatment or not, and situations in like that of your mother, where there's a debilitating disease that advanced extremely rapidly and you're in immense suffering, or in cases where people tried, attempted, and successfully attempted their own suicide. I know cases of all of them, and I won't say any more names than the specifics in which I just stated. However, by asking someone else, if I were in a situation in which I felt I could not continue living, I did not want to continue living, by asking someone else to get involved, I have done something to violate them. Not necessarily their rights, but what I have done, even if they were consenting and willing to help me, is put them in a situation in which they have a new scenario, me, to deal with, that they would have not normally had to deal with. So unless they're something like, and I'm going to use the medical term psychotic to mean a psychopath, in which they do not feel emotional ties with other people, or they're a murderer and they just are okay with murdering people, killing another person typically would weigh on a person very heavily. And even if it's not your right not to get asked such a thing, it is violating to you in some way, in some form. At least that's my 2 cents. It may not necessarily be your right for me never to ask you to help me with my suicide. However, by asking me to help you with my suicide, I will have violated you in some way. Because even if you were a complete stranger, it wouldn't matter.
We're like past 7 o'clock.
Yeah, I saw that. I think we can wrap up here. Anything specific you wanted to add before we take off, just on a final shebang?
Nothing I could think of. I think we actually tackled everything that I had in mind.
Do you like our new outro page, our thanks for watching page? This is the one I designed that I was intentionally trying to get yesterday, but I couldn't get it to work because the audio issues. Nonetheless, this is a very touchy topic, and it's not something that everyone's going to enjoy or that everyone will even listen to or get through. I get that. Thank you if you did listen, and we apologize if we said anything that may have been offensive, or it definitely wasn't intentional. Both of us have dealt with a lot involving maybe this specific subject or subjects that are directly related to things like assisted suicide. So we appreciate you bearing with us. And if you have any questions, if you'd like to submit a topic suggestion, please reach out to us either on Twitch, give us a follow, or on Facebook. Now That's Debatable Podcast. That's our Facebook page. We answer questions there. We respond to comments there. We take topic suggestions there. But thanks for bearing with us for a few weeks and dealing with our audio issues and whatnot. Gio, anything you want to say before we head out?
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. And we'll be streaming next week, Tuesday, 6 p.m., unless there's another problem.
Yep, should be cleared up. It seems like we have the audio issue at least mostly fixed, and maybe a few tidies up between now and then. Otherwise, thank you. We'll see you next week.